screen here.
Anyone who's not muted, please mute.
Okay, can everyone hear me and see my full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And can you see a little image of me off in the corner?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Then I'm seeing what you're seeing, so we can go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be talking about Renaissance art in Northern Europe and Spain, primarily covering some of the greatest known artists from the Netherlands, the Low Countries, Dürer from Germany, who traveled around a lot, as we'll see. And towards the end, after we've covered Northern Europe and some of the Holy Roman Empire, and I'll kind of explain what that is in a minute. We will go south into Spain, and we're primarily going to be looking at a lot of the connections between artists and styles and politics, and these two regions were very closely bound together. And in fact, Spain, Habsburg Spain, was in control of much of Northern Europe at the time, and quite a lot of Italy as well. So Italy will come into it more in our discussion of Spain, but we're going to look primarily at the Low Countries and then Spain. So some of the artists that we're going to be looking at include Jan van Eyck, Rogier van der Weyden, Hugo van der Goes, Dürer, Bosch, Bruegel, and finally, in this section, Goltzius. And the primary themes that we'll look at, and I really hope to save some time for questions at the end, although if you do have a question, you can raise your hand, and Jim, if you could keep an eye on those questions, or maybe even field the questions, and decide whether we should handle them immediately or save them for the end, that would be a huge help.
I will try.
Okay. So the themes include technique, materials, and very importantly, patronage and its impact on how painting in particular, but we'll also discuss a little bit of architecture, especially when we get to Spain. And then the market. There's a new emerging art market as people who were not necessarily nobility achieved the ability to commission artworks, portraits, and devotional works as well. And then we'll also mention towards the middle to end of the Northern Europe section, the advent of the Reformation, which was led by Martin Luther and a couple of other theologians in the 1520s. And the Reformation was also closely tied up with a couple of the artists that we're going to be talking about today. So let's look at the Low Countries. This is from the kind of political divisions of the mid-16th century. You can see in the inset the proximity to Great Britain, and the Low Countries are sandwiched in between Scandinavia, Germany, and France. And these political boundaries changed quite a lot. And when you're looking at the screen here, most of what is green is the Spanish Netherlands. These were overseen or administered by a regent, and those regents were instrumental in the connection, economic and artistic and political, between Spain and Northern Europe. Eventually, and we'll talk about this probably in a later training session, but you can see in the north, this is the Dutch Republic, what becomes the Dutch Republic, and there's a lot of back and forth in the 16th century of artists between the Spanish and the Northern Netherlands, and we'll look at that in particular with a couple of artists towards the end of the section. Now, one of the earliest and maybe most interesting developments in Northern Europe is the widespread use of oil paint and the medieval sort of composition or platform of the multiple panel polyptych, in this case a triptych with outer wings. And one of the main differences between this medieval kind of armature or composition is that beginning with Robert Campen and Rogier van der Weyden, we start to see the use of illusionistic space and the interaction of the spaces between panels, so that while each panel is framed individually and then hinged together, we have the donors here of the Merode altarpiece on the left who are actually seeming to look in on the scene. We'll see it further. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I think I can hide my thumbnail so we can all see all three panels. This is, of course, in the Cloisters collection at the Metropolitan Museum, and it shows the central panel shows the Annunciation. The angel Gabriel has just arrived to speak to the Virgin Mary, who is reclining and reading her Bible. And we can see a lily in the middle of the table. The lily is a symbol of the purity of Mary. We can also see outstanding details that are meticulously painted using very fine brushes and oil paint that's mixed with linseed oil. The pigments are mixed with linseed oil, and we'll see when we get to Jan van Eyck a further exploration of these materials. You can see that the candle has just gone out on the table, and there's also a nice detail of a Jewish prayer shawl in the back of the very Netherlandish room that she's in. Now, in the right panel, we see Joseph, who has no idea what's going on, at work in his carpenter's workshop, and he's busy building two mouse traps. There's one on his workbench, and there's one out in the window. And through the window, you can see the typical cityscape of the Netherlands. And these mouse traps refer to refer to Jesus, and of course Mary has just agreed to bear Jesus, knowing full well, in full knowledge of what would happen to him, but also in full knowledge that of his mission. And the mousetraps are a symbol of Jesus as a bait for Satan. So Joseph is the earthly father, and here he is very poignantly using his skills to make this quite unusual piece of iconography, the mousetrap. So following Robert Campen, we come to Roger van der Weyden and the Descent from the Cross, which was commissioned by the Longbowmen of Louvain. And here we see, again, a panel painting with some still Gothic details in the architectural frame of the painting. And we can see that everything has been pushed forward to the front of the picture plane. So while there is space implied, like the Robert Campen, the space is too small for the figures, but the emotion is conveyed through the swooning Virgin, whose body mirrors that of the descending corpse of Jesus. We see an attention to a lot of the clothing and robes of the figures, and we remember that in the Netherlands, the textile industry was the lifeblood of the economy, and so an appreciation of these garments is would have been automatic among viewers. Now we come to the Great Ghent altarpiece, and this is, let me just, for 1 second, I'll be right back. Yeah, homeschooling three kids is getting in the way a little bit here, but we'll be fine. Okay, so the Ghent altarpiece, which was completed in 1432, is at the St. Bavo's Cathedral, and I don't know, I'm sure some of you have been to see the altarpiece. It has been undergoing conservation treatment for many years, and a group of SDMA travelers was able to see part of this process 4 years ago, and each of the panels had been removed, and while each one was being worked on, the work was done in public so that people could actually see the conservation studio. So the materials have been very well studied at this point, and the iconography as well. And we can see Jan van Eyck and his brothers, Hubert, who we don't really know much about, then Lambert, who finished some of his paintings after his death. They were, in the old days, Jan van Eyck was thought to have invented oil painting, which wasn't the case, but he tinkered around with the recipe enough with the linseed oil and pigment and so forth that he achieved a very successful material and technique for painting on panel. And it allowed a very, very fine line to be drawn with fine brushes. And this allowed for the inspection of very, very, very highly detailed scenes. And so we can see as we move around here, we have Adam and Eve in the upper panels, the lamb in the lower central panel. We're going to look at that in just a minute, and we have the detail of the crown in the upper panel, as well as musical angels, choirs of angels, and as we look down in the bottom corner, one of these panels is actually a 20th century copy after the Ghent altarpiece was dismantled and stolen by the Nazis during World War II. One of the panels was never recovered. It was stolen again and not recovered, and so it was recreated by renowned Belgian art conservator who was a partner of George Stout, who happened to found the conservation lab at the San Diego Museum of Art, which became the Balboa Art Conservation Center. If I can move forward. Okay, my screen has frozen up here just for a minute. I'm going to stop video. All right, I'll be right back. I have to restart the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Jim, let me know if my screen has disappeared.
No, you're fine. You're back.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So here we see the lamb who is essentially pouring holy blood into the chalice and at the center on the altarpiece. This is an indication of the Eucharist, the two main parts of the Eucharist are being legitimized in the center here and honored. And the interesting thing about Van Eyck, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, he traveled quite a bit, and it seems he made his way to Spain, and was really responsible for not the invention of oil painting per se, but certainly the dissemination of the technique, and it just continued over generations, as we'll see, to influence art across, especially those regions ruled by the Habsburgs, both the Spanish Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire.
I think if you just click in that corner, the controls ought to show up.
There, yeah, they disappeared for a while. Okay, there we go.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
one of our docents has a hand up. Bob?
Okay.
The painting that you just showed from the altarpiece with the lamb,
Yeah.
up at the top, there's a representation. Is that the Holy Spirit or is that the Son? It looked very unusual, if you could go back to it.
Okay, so this one?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the Holy Spirit. And essentially shedding the supernatural light onto the scene.
And at the center of that, is there an image there of some kind, a dove?
Yes, it's a dove. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. So the dove being a central symbol of the third person of the Trinity. Okay. Now in a slightly more temporal setting, here we have Jan van Eyck's very famous Arnolfini portrait of 1434 at the National Gallery in London. And this really simple seeming scene is packed with details, and it also sheds us some light into Jan van Eyck as a thinker. And the inscription on the background, which we saw in a detail at the very beginning in my title page, the inscription on the wall says Van Eyck was here in 1434. And then there's this mirror in the background, which actually shows a detail of the artist himself looking in on the scene in the back of the two Arnolfini figures, who were he was representative of the Medici in the Netherlands, and this may be a betrothal scene, but she's dressed while it appears that she is pregnant. She's not. She's just, this is the style of the clothing at the time, and the indicator is that it's probably a betrothal or wedding portrait with the dog, the little terrier in the forefront as a symbol of faith, as the husband takes his wife's hand. There is also the detail of the dust broom hanging from the four-poster bed, which is also an indicator of domestic participation care. The house would be taken care of by both of them in their different roles. And the portrait. This portrait here was owned by a courtier of Margaret of Austria. Margaret of Austria is one of the regents of the Netherlands, and she amasses a very important art collection, much of which would be inherited by her descendants. And we'll come back to her in just a minute, because we'll start to see these deep connections between Northern Europe and Spain as we move through. Here's the detail, and you can just barely make out the artist in the far distance, and the backs of the two primary subjects. Now, Petrus Christus was the next, after Jan van Eyck, was the next kind of inheritor of the fine oil painting tradition, and this portrait of Carthusian is at the Metropolitan. Many of you have seen it, I'm sure, but you can see the fine brushwork in the beard, the exacting verisimilitude of the face, the depiction of the textile as being very important, and the trompe-l'oeil aspect of the insect who's sitting on the frame right above Petrus's signature along the bottom. And we're very fortunate right now to have a great altarpiece by Petrus Christus at the San Diego Museum of Art. It's on loan from the Timken Museum, so you would have been able to see it if the Timken were open, but it's not right now. And for that reason, we have a number of the Timken masterpieces on loan. So I encourage you, if you do make it into the museum, look at the Dormition of the Virgin by Petrus Christus, because it's one of the most important early Netherlandish paintings in the country, and we happen to have it installed in our gallery right now. So you can really get a sense of the brushwork by evaluating these paintings in person, and you can see that that Jan van Eyck and Petrus Christus are signing their paintings, and this, early on in the Renaissance was very unusual. It was very unusual in the medieval period, although there are instances of one or two signatures that we know of, in sculpture in particular. But these artists were now making a name for themselves by using their signatures, and this is a reflection of the market economy that they were part of. Hugo van der Goes, and this is such an interesting painting. This adoration of the shepherds was commissioned by an Italian who was also, like Arnolfini, a representative of the Medici in Flanders, and there are donor portraits here on the right and left panels, and the scene of the adoration of the shepherds has been transposed to a very medieval looking Northern European kind of architectural setting. And you can see that the scale in some cases still reflects a medieval tendency to make the secondary figures smaller. Mary herself is enormous. And then there are also these wonderful details, such as the still life in the foreground of the painting, where you can see a ceramic vessel and a glass vessel, one with the ceramic with white lilies indicating the purity of the Virgin, and the vessel that the lilies are in is a Hispano-Moresque lusterware vessel that was made somewhere in the region of Valencia. And so we see everyday details being included in a biblical scene, and the interest in depicting these minute details that delighted the senses, and also indicated that these objects traveled just as the paintings did. And this is a theme that we'll come back to over and over again until the end of the lecture today. Now, paintings moved back and forth a great deal, and artists did also, especially in the case of Jan van Eyck and Albrecht Dürer, as we'll see. But even more portable than paintings and artists themselves were works on paper. And one of the great developments for not just artistic reasons, but for intellectual reasons and religious and political reasons, the widespread use, the invention of the printing press with movable type had a huge impact on the dissemination of knowledge and ideas, and artists began really taking advantage of the printmaking techniques in both woodcut engraving. There's woodcut and copper engravings, both a form of intaglio printmaking, in which the matrix, either a sheet of metal like copper or a wood panel, would be incised and then inked and then run through a printing press. Martin Schongauer, and you can see the two examples here, was one of the earliest innovators in this art form. Actually, the image on the left is one that we have in the museum, and probably his most famous, The Temptation of St. Anthony, on the right. And you can see the individual lines incised into the matrix and then printed. This had a huge impact on the development of iconography and the standardization of iconography, and also the compositional use of these by other artists. So we find that that especially Dürer, his compositions could be used by other artists to help with their own works of art, be it paintings or what have you. Albert Dürer was along with Van Eyck, was one of the great innovators of the Northern Renaissance. And here we see one of his prints, and you can see the kind of stylistic appreciation that he had for Martin Schongauer's work, with this overall agitation of line, highly controlled, however, and the composition with the sleeping apostles and the angel offering Jesus the cup, which he at first doesn't want to take, but knows that he has to. The cup will be his cross eventually. Anyway, we see Dürer in a self-portrait where he clearly is channeling Jesus in his image, but he also traveled to Italy, and that's important when we're looking at this portrait, because it's on panel, but he's incorporated details that are that show that he understood Venetian painting and Venetian portraiture at the time, and brought those styles from Venice back to Northern Europe. In fact, he was in Venice twice, once in the 1490s, and then again in the years after he painted this self-portrait in the 1500s, the first decade of the 16th century. Things like appreciation for the classical or antique foundation of Renaissance painting in Italy. The idea of the Renaissance is very different in Northern Europe, because in Italy it specifically refers to a renewed interest in the antique world of Greece and Rome and the forms that were created, especially the human form, but architecture as well. And we see in these two panels of Adam and Eve, Albert Dürer has studied the classical anatomies while he's in Italy, and returns to Northern Europe to kind of spread this type of appreciation for an ideal human form. On the right is his very famous print of Melancholia 1, and this allegorical figure who is the summation of human knowledge, essentially, but also has been interpreted as a allegorical self-portrait of the artist, as a thinker and a maker. And you can see there's a ton of iconography, including the magic square, the hourglass, all of these things referring to different different symbolic things that the artist was considering. The carpentry at the front, there's even nails there that probably refer to not just physical construction of architecture, but also, of course, to the crucifixion. And this pose of Melancholia, the female figure, would be used over and over again throughout, especially the later 16th and 17th century, as a in different ways, but as a figure both of contemplation and of melancholy. But it means more than just melancholy. This is one of the most remarkable self-portraits that Dürer produced. And this was right after he came back from Italy for the first time, and 1498. It was painted in Nuremberg, but then later sent as a gift to Charles I of England. And this is one of these paintings that has such an interesting provenance or lifespan. It was after Charles I of England is sentenced to death in 1649 and beheaded. His collection was sold off. Many of the finest works were bought by a Spanish courtier by the name of Luis de Haro, and then given to Philip IV of Spain. We'll return to Philip IV next week when we talk about Spain during the 17th century. But you can see Dürer has presented himself in a very Italianate type of composition, with his arm rested on a windowsill with a view into a landscape in the background, a very Flemish landscape. But the clothing and the composition reflect his knowledge of Italian painting. And the fact that he's got gloves on indicates his station as and ambitions to nobility. Hieronymus Bosch is, of course, one of the most interesting figures and one of the most idiosyncratic figures in the history of Western painting. His most famous painting, of course, is the Garden of Earthly Delights, which he painted right around the same time as Albrecht Dürer was painting that self-portrait that we just saw. The work was eventually acquired by Philip II of Spain, which explains why it's in the Prado today and is one of the biggest draws of any art museum in the world, as people go to see not just the scene in the left panel of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, but also the much more sinister happenings in the right panel, as well as the kind of almost surrealistic central panel. These paintings were an intellectual delight, and Hieronymus Bosch, again, is working in this triptych form, which is medieval in origin, but he is obviously including some very medieval imagery, but updated for a 16th century audience, or early 16th century audience. Now, back in Weimar and Saxony, Lucas Cranach was working in the generation after Bosch, and he is perhaps best known as a painter of Martin Luther and Martin Luther's circle. And of course, we made an acquisition at the museum recently of the Nymph of the Spring. I typically don't show our own SDMA works in these presentations because we can always see them in person, and I want to encourage everyone, when they feel that they can do it, to see the works of art in our collection that reflect some of what we're looking at today, and of course what we're going to be looking at next week. This is a portrait of Martin Luther, and Cronach did dozens of them, of Martin Luther and his theologian partners in the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was an Augustinian, trained Augustinian monk who was famous for writing his 95 Theses, maybe the most important of which had to do with the sale of indulgences and corruption in the church, and he was asked at the Diet of Worms in 1521 to renege his writings. He had translated the Bible and published it in German, and then published these theses that were critical of the church. And so he was asked to take these back in 1521. He said no, and he was excommunicated. And this continued and maybe fueled the Protestant Reformation, especially in Northern Europe. And it had huge consequences for not just the Netherlands, but also for England and for Spain, because Spain was so involved in Northern Europe politically and then militarily that the Protestant Reformation became part of the political theater of the time. And now, Lucas Cranach was, like Dürer, who also worked for Nuremberg and the city of Nuremberg, on behalf of Luther. But he was politically very, Cranach was very, both of them, I suppose, were politically savvy. And so Cranach was able to work for the Elector of Saxony as well, and who was, and then indirectly for Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain and so forth. And here we see the wife of the Elector of Saxony, Sybil of Cleves, from 1526. And if we move forward, we'll see another image of her, and this is just a fascinating painting in the tradition of the hunt, which would continue to Velázquez and Rubens late in the next century, but also goes back to tapestries from the later stages of the medieval era. This is the hunt at the Castle of Torgau in honor of Charles V from 1544. It's a large oil on panel, and it was a gift of the Elector of Saxony to Charles V. And again, this explains why it is in the Prado, which was based on the royal collection, the Spanish royal collection. And I hope everyone can see at the right, the lower right, there's a group of women dressed in red, led by the crossbow toting Sybil of Cleves, who we just saw. So here they are, the courtiers and the ladies of the court participating in the stag hunt, which was a noble court tradition. And you can see the dogs are assisting, and there are huntsmen everywhere to help. But in general, this can be read primarily as a group portrait, and one that was intended as a diplomatic gift. So we see the strong ties between the electors of Saxony, and the Spanish court. Now, it was around this time, and we just saw that in the hunt scene, a real attention to landscape. But we began to see landscape taking more and more precedence over the entire composition of paintings. And one of the real innovators of this was Joachim Patinier. And Patinier really innovated this just jewel-like blue Flemish landscape. Much of it was imaginary, but this is the landscape with Saint Christopher, as you see the giant saint carrying who would turn out to be the Christ child after he got across the river. It was Saint Christopher realized who he had been carrying across the river, and it's sort of classic conversion story or Christ's revelation. And again, this was an example of Flemish painting that made its way into Spain. Now, Peter Bruegel, and we have a really exquisite example from the Timken on view now at our museum of Peter Bruegel's work, which is the Parable of the Sower. I encourage you all to really spend some time with that painting. It's remarkable that we have the chance to have it on view. I don't think we've ever had it on view, but Jim can remind me if I'm forgetting any of its early provenance. But this is probably his most famous painting is a country scene, and it's one of everyday life in the fields called The Harvesters from 1565. And we see that in the Netherlands, there's the beginning of an appreciation for real landscape and as well for scenes that didn't necessarily have an overt Christian narrative. There may be allegories to discern from this, but it's also an early example of some of the naturalistic town scenes that Bruegel and his successors painted. One of the intriguing characters from around this time is Katharina von Hemissen, whose self-portrait you see on the right here, and it's one of the very few works that we know is by her, and she signed it in the quite prominent position right next to the easel, and dated it, and she was active in Antwerp, but also went to Spain with Maria of Austria, her patron. And now Maria was the sister of Charles V, so she immediately had entree into the royal court. And Maria of Austria, like Margaret of Hungary, was one of the leading Habsburg art patrons of this entire Renaissance period. And when we get to Philip II of Spain, we can see that those are his two guiding lights when it came to art patronage. It wasn't necessarily Charles V, the great patron of Titian, although he appreciated Charles V's contributions. Philip II was really looking at his aunt and great aunt. And speaking of turning an eye to more realistic, naturalistic scenes, we find a wonderful tradition beginning in the Netherlands of still life, foreground still life imagery or kitchen imagery. Comes in many different forms, but with a devotional scene or a biblical scene being pushed all the way into the background of the painting. And this is Christ in the House of Mary and Martha from 1553 by Peter Ertzen. He spawned an entire generation of artists and followers that worked in this mode. And you can see the delight in all of the foodstuffs and the lilies and the kind of everyday scene taking place, including the fireplace on the right and the crockery that's fallen on the ground. And then when you look to the background, you see Jesus sitting while he talks to Mary and Martha. And of course, Martha is agitated because she thinks her sister isn't doing anything because she's just sitting at his feet listening to his word. And he gestures with his hand and says, no, what she's doing is important, and it may be more important than the busy work that you're up to. And so you don't let this bother you. Essentially, that's a paraphrase, to say the least. But you can see the attention to detail here, and this type of composition would have a huge impact on later artists, both in the Netherlands and more especially in Spain. Ertzen and the generation after him kind of ushered in a northern Mannerist kind of style, and Bartholomeus Spranger was probably the most important of the painters in this kind of genre. I'm just going to show you one example here of Heracles and Omphale. The part of Hercules's travails was that he was indentured to Queen Omphale for 3 years, during which he did her work, and you can see she's taken his club and his lion skin. He's dressed in her clothes. There's a great degree of humor and eroticism in this. He's even holding her distaff, the spindle with the wool. And the placement of his foot is also very suggestive and goes back to, I think, Roman painting. And the kind of poses and elongated anatomies are very indicative of this mannered kind of approach. It was a very intellectual in some cases, or humorous and slightly weird in other examples, but it became very popular. And Spranger himself, we have a print after this painting in our collection, as well as an important Spranger painting on loan that I think is still on view. And Spranger collaborated. He was located at the Emperor Rudolph II's court in Prague, and although he was originally from Antwerp, he collaborated with his Flemish friend and partner, Hendrik Goltzius. And I think a lot of you will probably know that we have a very, very important collection of many of Goltzius's work in the San Diego Museum of Art. And I'm showing you two examples that are not in our collection. One, what became a very famous self-portrait just of the artist's right hand from 1588, which was later printed. And then on the right, the Farnese Hercules, who the artist was able to see while he traveled through Italy. And he spent quite a long time doing studies of antique sculptures and studying Renaissance painting in Italy. And what was funny was he traveled with a valet, with a servant, and occasionally we know from his biography that that he would exchange clothing and identity with his servant in order to judge a potential patron's feelings about the quality of his artwork. Very interesting and funny stories. But Goltzius would return to the Netherlands, found the most successful publishing house to produce his prints, and eventually go on to meet and influence Rubens, especially in the way that the workshop was set up, and his compositions and anatomies. And Goltzius's prints went all over the world during his lifetime. He eventually, because of some problems with his hands, he started painting because it was a little bit easier to hold the brush, and he becomes quite an interesting painter. But like Dürer, his main influence was through printmaking. Now, to turn to Spain, you can see here the regions of Spain, and it's a very, well, like the Netherlands, it's made up of many different what were individual kingdoms and areas. It was finally consolidated by Isabel the Catholic and Ferdinand, and then continued to kind of evolve from 1492 when they finally topple the last of the Muslim rulers in the south of Spain, and then by 1580, with the Iberian Union, Portugal has become part of Spain for a short time, for about 60 years. Spain is during this time a very diverse population. It's diverse geographically as well, from mountains and deserts to plains that produce a lot of food, thanks to the Islamic agricultural revolution. It was the most successful producer of a wide variety of food sources, and it was also importing things from the Americas by this point. But it had the scientific knowledge from the Islamic courts, from the court gardens in Toledo, and Cordoba, that it was well, you would eat way better there than anywhere else in Europe, but it also exported a great deal. Some of the artists that we'll look at today are Bermejo, Juan de Flandes, Barraguete, Titian. I'm going to save El Greco for next week to talk about El Greco and Ribera and Velázquez and so forth. But the themes, apart from what we discussed about Northern Europe, some of the themes here are royal patronage, which was at the heart of the Renaissance, and then the early Baroque period. The Counter-Reformation in response to Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, the Inquisition and what that meant, and at the very end, and what we'll really save this for next week, the nobility of painting. I touched on it with Dürer, and we'll touch on it with Titian, but when we get to Velázquez, we'll really talk about it a bit more, because we'll bring in Rubens too when we're talking about Spain next week. This is the hustling, bustling metropolis of Seville, one of the most important port cities in all of Europe. It was the gateway to the Americas. This was painted little bit earlier than the date I have on the slide. It's probably about 1590. And at the center of this chaotic scene, where you can see the Manila galleons returning from the Americas, you can see spotlighted is the Giralda, which is the bell tower of the Cathedral of Seville, which was adapted. It was a minaret, and it was then renovated to become the cathedral's bell tower after it had been the Muslim minaret at the center of town. This is the Guadalquivir River, and you notice that when you see something in Spanish with with an AL, and a lot of times with the ALQ, for example, al Andalus or alcohol. These are words with Arabic origins, and you'll find them throughout the Spanish language. So on the slide back here, when I had the official languages of Castilian Catalan, Valencian Catalan, Galician Basque, and Occitan, the importance of Arabic to the Spanish language is very, very important. Another important event following that 1492 expulsion of the Muslims, many of whom stayed but had to convert. There was the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, in which the globe was basically bifurcated into a Portuguese zone and a Spanish zone. Eventually, for that period of 60 years, it would come together. But in essence, Spain could go across the Atlantic, while Portugal could go around Africa and towards the east that way. But this is in response to the Columbus's journeys and figuring out that the world was a lot bigger than they thought it was, and that there were two continents that were in the way. And so the papacy was essentially responsible for dividing the circumnavigation, or the direction of circumnavigation, between the Spanish and the Portuguese. During several periods of the early and late medieval times, there are periods when the three major monotheistic religions all coexisted, more or less, in Spain. And these periods are known as convivencia. And it's the supposed harmony of Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And in particular, in places like Cordoba, under Muslim rule in the 10th century, in Toledo, even earlier under Christians, they were the Visigoths. And here in the middle, in the central slide, you can see Santa Maria la Blanca, which began as a synagogue. And then you can see on the left the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which is preserved thanks to Charles V. But there's also a church that is right in the middle of the mosque that you access through the mosque. And it's a remarkable, I can't think of any other, well, there are lots of examples of buildings being built on top of buildings, but buildings being built within buildings. It's very, very interesting. Charles didn't want to destroy the beauty that his Muslim predecessors had put into the Great Mosque. And you see on the right a painting by Berruguete that includes the Virgin and Child, but also this ceiling decoration, this wood ceiling decoration that is a continuation of Muslim woodworking traditions, usually called mudehar. This is Isabel, the Catholic, Isabel of Castile. And she was a devout, energetic leader, and was certainly, I would say, the more intellectual of the two Catholic kings, and also she was the driving force between any art patronage of the Catholic kings. By Catholic kings, I'm just referring to Isabel and Ferdinand. This is a series of triptychs by Juan de Flandes, and there were originally 47. 27 of them survive, and it's an interesting devotional commission. And the painter Juan de Flandes, as his name suggests, is originally from Flanders, John of Flanders, and he traveled to Spain and worked with Michael Citeaux, or Michel Citeaux, who was originally from Tallinn, which is in present-day Estonia. But he went from Estonia to train in Bruges and in Antwerp before going to Spain. So this kind of court style certainly had the initial impact of Flemish painting in Spain. And if we look at a detail, you can see the landscape with that beautiful blue in the background. Isabella, as a child herself, is here in the taking part in the multiplication of loaves and fishes. She is her face is right above that of the child in the foreground, while Jesus preaches, and the image places the queen at the center of the biblical passage. So she's there, if not physically, in spirit. These are split between the 27 panels are split between Madrid and the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Now, continuing on our investigation of Flemish trends in Spain, we look at a little comparison here of Fernando Gallego, the Piedad, Pietà in Spanish, in the Prado from 1470, and the part of the Miraflores altarpiece from 1445 by Roger van der Weyden. The Miraflores altarpiece was owned by Margaret of Austria, who I mentioned earlier. This was Charles V's aunt, and she was instrumental in forming a tradition of Habsburg royal or imperial art patronage. And so this style really permeated what was going on in Spain. You can see the kind of reversal of the composition in the Gallego, that the donors of the panel to the left of the Pietà are much smaller in stature, reflecting their earthly nature versus the much more important and hence larger Mary and Jesus. So we're getting a sense for stylistic continuity between the Netherlands and Spain. And now this is a very interesting comparison, because on the left, Saint Dominic of Silos, who is enthroned as a bishop by Bartolome Bermejo, and you'll remember that we have a very important painting by Bermejo in the collection, and it's the arrest of Santa Engracia, and it's part of a larger altarpiece which is dispersed, but was in Daroca in Spain at one point. And on the right, Jan van Eyck's Virgin and Child with Canon van der Pela of 1434. And again, I'm going back to the early ownership of the painting, because it was owned by Mary of Hungary, who was Charles V's sister. And so the awareness of these early Flemish masterpieces really permeated the artistic imagination at the royal court in Spain. And the attention to detail, and when you look at the face of Saint Dominic on the left, there's still the medieval gold backdrop and so forth that would have been desirable, certainly in a church setting. But the naturalism of the facial features is really remarkable, and it makes a very nice comparison to the image of Canon van der Pelle on the right of the Jan van Eyck. Now, moving along to Pedro Berruguete, another one of the most important of the Spanish painters. This image of Saint Dominic under the canopy, who is in the process of pardoning a heretic. It's a very interesting painting, full of odd details, and you can see in the center, right below Saint Dominic, there's an image of a canon who's fallen asleep. Even though there's this horrible scene of torture that's reminiscent of what happened during parts of the Inquisition. So while Dominic is actually in the process of pardoning, the artist is also indicating what's going on in more present-day Spain. In the cathedral in Avila, the hometown of St. Teresa, we find two paintings that indicate a shift right around 1500. And you can see Juan de Borgoña, his Annunciation on the left, and then Pedro de Berruguete's Temptation of St. Thomas Aquinas on the right. And these two paintings are in the same part of, well, they're part of the same commission, essentially. And you can see the artesonado or mudéjar ceiling in the very cramped space that St. Thomas Aquinas occupies. You can see the gold in the background. You imagine the saint standing up and not being able to fully fit into this space here. Meanwhile, he's going to be tempted by a prostitute who is off on the right-hand side, which was actually part of his biography and sent by St. Thomas's family to tempt him away from the religious order, unsuccessfly, I should add. But then when you compare that just a few years later to Juan de Borgoña's, and again, the names here are indicators of where the artists come from. So John of Burgundy. So again, he's coming from the Low Countries, or at least that region of Northern Europe. And the Annunciation happens with this beautiful blue sky in the background, the Hortus Conclusus, or enclosed garden in the background with roses. There are lilies and a beautiful still life. The lighting is clear and crisp, and most of these details are indicative of some knowledge of both Burgundian painting and Italian painting. And as we continue to look at the development of painting in Spain, we're going to see more and more of the kind of parallel influence of Italian painting on developments in Spain. And Spain is a very interesting place because although it was politically the most important and most powerful political entity in Europe, it was mainly artistically a synthesizer or absorber of these twin innovations, one happening in the Netherlands and the other happening in Italy. And now what happens was, it's not just a regional school that mimicked what was going on in Italy and the Netherlands. It was really becoming its own style. And here we see Juan de Juanes on the left, the burial of Saint Stephen, and at the right, the entombment by Raphael from 2 generations earlier, 1507. And you can see how some of the lessons of the Italian High Renaissance are taking shape in Spain. It had to do with the movement of paintings and painters and court taste. And you can see it in the atmospheric perspective, in which you get a sense of the light traveling through particles in the atmosphere, and in the palette used by Juan de Juanes. Not to mention the overall compositional similarity, with people crying on the right. And even more in this comparison becomes super clear that the painting on the right, which is okay, there we go. The painting on the right, in comparison with that of Leonardo's example, you can see the oh, it keeps going forward. Yeah. Bear with me for just one sec. Okay. Okay.
Michael, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go right ahead. Sorry, I've got someone's got a window that's popping up that I can't get through.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no, it's fine.
Bob Boltax, one of the trainees, has a hand up.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Bob, if you could unmute yourself to...
We already dealt with that question. I'm sorry, the hand didn't come down.
Oh, okay. All right. No problem. Okay, so we have Fernando Yanez, the painter on the right, who clearly had firsthand knowledge of Leonardo's work. He borrows from 3 different paintings by Leonardo, and in fact worked with him before returning to Spain. This is from 1505. St. John the Baptist, the Christ Child, and Virgin Mary, of course. But it's certainly an indication of shifting tastes in Spain that are happening very, very rapidly right after the turn of the century. And about a generation later, we find that the continuation of the influx of Flemish painters and Italian painters, as we'll see in a minute. This work is the Deposition, or the Descent from the Cross, by Pedro de Campana. He's best known as Pedro de Campana, although his name is Peter Kempeneer. the Hispanicization of his name is what has stayed with us. He worked in the cathedral in Seville, was responsible for the main altarpiece in the Cathedral of Seville. But here you can see the really the the history of not just Van Eyck, but Hugo van der Goes and even even the early Flemish things that we looked at are, and Patinier, with the landscape, the way that the Virgin swoons quite unnaturally. This is, even in the 1530s, is still part of the visual language of of painting, of specifically Flemish painting in Spain. And
a moment,
yeah,
Michael,
yeah.
Bob, is that a new hand up or the old one?
That's the old one. I'm sorry. I thought you took it down.
No, I thought you took it down. And then Richard had a hand up. Is that new?
Did you say, what was that, Dr. Goebel?
I said, I see your hand up. Is that a new question or an old one?
No, it's a new question. The question was the influence between and interactions, really cross-seeding almost, between Flemish work and Spanish work as you're showing us. I mean, the major reason for that dynamic, I assume, was just the influence of Spanish Netherlands and cross-Habsburg lands. Was it the same for the Italians influencing the High Renaissance in Spain, or was it more that the Spanish painters were actually going to Italy and learning from that exchange?
Okay, that's a great question, and gets to the heart of the development of painting in Spain. Spain, of course, had holdings throughout Italy, including the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is Naples and Sicily, but also parts of Milan and northern Italy. So there was a natural kind of influx of paintings coming in from Italy, whereas the connection was maybe less direct than with the Spanish Netherlands. There was an appreciation for Italian paintings, especially in Spain, that was driven by the royal courts, and so they were interested, especially when we get to Philip II. They were interested in hiring Italian painters to come to Italy. To come to Spain. Okay, so from Pedro de Campana, or Peter Campanier, we find very much a continuation or a development of this type of style in Luis de Morales, who worked in Portugal and Spain, but trained in the Netherlands. And this his compositions are normally less monumental than Pedro de Campana's. He would have certainly known his work, and in the case of this Pietà here, he kind of telescopes the image to focus more on the human emotions of the work. He was known as El Divino in his lifetime, and mainly because of the subject matter that he became famous for. And to get back to the question about Italy, this leads really nicely into a discussion of Titian. and Titian's involvement in the imagery of the royal court in Spain, primarily in Madrid, but the court moved around a little bit. Titian himself never set foot in Spain, but if you go to the Prado, you'll see immediately that it's an enormous collection of Titian paintings, because he would send paintings from his studio in Venice, both to Charles V. In the case of, this is the wrong title, by the way, I don't know what happened, but this is Titian's Charles V on horseback in the Prado. The dimensions are correct, but the title somehow is not. So again, this is Charles V on horseback in a composition that would influence the next generations all the way to Velázquez and later even Goya, with the tradition of equestrian portraiture in Spain. Okay. At the royal court, Philip II is the heir to Charles V, and a wide-ranging empire that included most of the Americas, and at this, by 1560 something, about 1565, included passage to Asia and the outpost and center of Manila in the Philippines that would become the commercial hub for trade with Asia. And Philip II is responsible for really shaping the development of court painting, at least in Spain. And you can see these two images are both by Sofonisba Anguissola, who was a royal portraitist and a teacher of painting and drawing to the two princesses of the royal court. She was actually in Spain for about 19 years, but her style had been developed in her native Italy, and she adapted. She's a very agile painter and highly educated. She was able to work within the Spanish mode that had been set by the painter Antonius More, who never actually went to the court in Spain, worked in Portugal for a while, but was Flemish himself, provided many of the royal portrait models that Sofonisba drew on, as did Alonso Sanchez Coello, who she worked alongside at the royal court. And this is an example, just one of the more famous examples of Antonius More's work. This is Mary Tudor from 1554. And Mary Tudor was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. So she was, when she married Philip II, and it was not a fruitful or happy marriage. She died in 1558, a few years after this painting was done. But the painting is a very powerful image. It's one that, it's a composition typically reserved for popes and kings. And so it's meant to convey her authority and the also her, she was primarily resident in London during her queenship of Spain. It's meant to indicate her authority and that of Spain throughout Europe. And anyway, her half-sister, after her death, her half-sister Elizabeth I, of course, becomes Queen of England. These are the two princesses who are being raised at the court in Madrid and being taught by Sofonisba. There, Isabel Clara Eugenia and Catalina Michaela from 1575 by Sanchez Coelho. Again, the name here on my slide is incorrect. I listed a different painter. It's also important, but not the right one. So again, this is Sanchez Coelho, and these two, especially Isabel Clara Eugenia, inherited their family's art patronage dedication, and Isabel went on, who's the one making eye contact with the viewer. She went on to become one of the most important political figures as regent of the Spanish Netherlands, as Mary of Austria had been, and she really took up not just the political role as regent or archduchess. She and her husband Albert were the archdukes of the Spanish Netherlands. She also became one of the foremost art patrons in all of Europe, female or otherwise, and she was Rubens's most important patron. They were political partners. She employed him not just as a painter, but as a diplomat, and we'll talk about that a little bit next week. But it's a sweet image here, and one that indicates the sophistication of the Spanish infantas or princesses. Philip II completed his most important contribution to the history of art, which was the monastery of El Escorial of St. Lawrence. It is an imposing building with four main functions: royal palace. It was also the sepulcher of the royal family. It's where most of the dead royal family members are buried, even to this day. It was also a monastery, as the title indicates, and a seminary. So these four functions were all interrelated, but it's where Philip II decided to live and spend his last days. The building was finished in well, it was begun in 1563, which is an interesting date in itself, but it took until at least the 1580s to finish, and it represented a complete change from earlier Spanish architecture, which was known as plateresco or plateresque. And probably the most famous of the examples of plateresque architecture is the University of Salamanca of 1529. And you might recognize this building, or at least something might indicate familiarity with this. If you have a sense of deja vu, it's because our museum is based, at least in the facade, on the University of Salamanca. This is William Templeton Johnson's facade for our museum here. Returning to the Escorial, the interior of the building gave the king and his courtiers an opportunity for a lot of artistic projects, and he primarily employed Italian painters to execute the large altarpieces. He employed Italian sculptors as well, and you can see the interior of the library here with portraits and ceiling frescoes. And the commissions, the continued commissions for mythological paintings by Philip II included this work by Titian from the 1550s. So before the Escorial was actually completed, he was still planning on works by Titian to come to his court. And this is one of the more famous of the commissions that Rubens actually copied in 1568 during his visit to the Spanish royal court. We'll talk about this briefly next week. But I mentioned primarily Italian painters, one of whom, Pellegrino Tibaldi, was responsible for a lot of the work in the main altarpiece in the chapel of the Escorial, and the central image of Saint Lawrence, San Lorenzo, who was martyred on the grill, this ironwork grill, and was the patron saint of this important building. Notice that if we go back a slide or two, when I mentioned the differences between the Plateresque style and the one that's employed at the Escorial, you can see the highly sloped roofs and the four corners with these towers. These are very much an influence from of Flemish architecture on styles in Spain that were being employed by Juan de Toledo and Juan de Herrera, who took over for de Toledo once he passed away. Now to go from, I thought I had an image of the plan of the Escorial, because what is interesting is I mentioned that there were four functions of the palace, which afforded the Philip II some rather modest royal apartments, but it was primarily monastery, seminary, and the burial place of the royal family. But the entire thing with these four corners, it was a grid design that was meant to reflect the attribute of St. Lawrence's martyrdom, the grill. And so the entire building, from a plan point of view, resembles this kind of ironwork grill that was used to kill San Lorenzo. One of the other Italian painters that Philip II and Philip III, his heir, brought to Spain was Bartolome Carduccio. Some of you might remember seeing this painting in person during its display at the Art and Empire exhibition last year. This is a powerful example of the beginnings of naturalism and Florentine reform painting becoming popular, becoming the hallmark of Spanish naturalism. And Bartolome Carduccio and his brother Vicente were brought over to work at the Escorial. And you can see immediately the difference between Pellegrino Tibaldi and this new naturalism. This is only a year later than Tibaldi's San Lorenzo painting, but it's an indicator of things to come. And in a way, it's a good segue into what we'll discuss next week. Now, I think I'll just close with a few brief mentions of the Spanish Renaissance further afield, in which the Italian and the Flemish influences continue to appear. This is the main altarpiece at the Franciscan convent of Huejotzingo in Mexico from the 1570s. And it certainly reflects Simon Perains's training in the Low Countries, but also his work at the court of Philip II and his knowledge of the altarpiece, the main altarpieces in churches in Seville. He also worked, while he was working at the court of Philip II, the artist was in the retinue of Viceroy Gaston de Peralta. That's how he came to make the transatlantic journey to Mexico. And in South America, we find artists like Bernardo Beatty working in the 1590s as an itinerant painter who also taught generations of artists in South America the kind of artistic language of the Italian Mannerist tradition that he was trained in Rome. He also went to Toledo and Seville and was influenced by the work of Luis de Morales, who I showed earlier. He worked in Lima, in Quito, and moved around quite a lot and was very influential. And to finish with two portraits that show the diplomatic potential and also the continuation of these hybrid styles in the Americas, the remarkable portrait of Francisco de Orobe and his sons of 1599, which was painted during a diplomatic mission that Don Francisco made to Quito. The painting was made there by an indigenous painter who was influenced by Beatty and others, or taught by Beatty and others. And the painting was done, this is the one on the left, was done in order to send back to the royal court in Madrid to show who the representatives were from the coastal region of one of Spain's far-flung kingdoms. This one, the Viceroyalty of Peru, which included present-day Ecuador. And on the right, the portrait of Doña Inés de Velasco, an important art patron and founder of monasteries, hospitals, and schools in Mexico. And this is a oil on panel of about 1590 by Baltasar de Echave Orio, who was from the Basque region, but is clearly influenced here by Flemish portraiture that would have been in line with the language of the court in Madrid at the time, and just an exquisite painting. The painting is actually in the Museo de Arte Nacional in Mexico. Our current director, Roxana Velasquez, was at one point earlier in her career the director of this National Museum in Mexico, and this is one of the star paintings from the end of the Renaissance, basically in Mexico. So we can see that Spain and the Netherlands and Germany and even the further reaches into the Holy Roman Empire and Rudolph's court in Prague. There are all of these artistic connections that were shared by primarily the church and the royal courts of Europe. And so, the artistic language didn't kind of develop in a bubble. Most artists knew of contemporary artists' work. Many traveled, as Dürer did most famously to Italy on 2 occasions, Goltzius as well, and many Spanish painters, Yanez, just one example, who knew Leonardo's work firsthand. The the dissemination of tastes and styles and knowledge, books, biographies, are all interrelated. And so looking at the big picture, it's interesting to see how many things are stylistically quite different, but might have these connections to earlier styles. So that's just a kind of big picture conclusion. Hopefully I can answer some questions at this point. We have a few minutes left. Jim, I'll let you step in here if you don't mind.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. What a magisterial, wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm going to pull some rank and ask the first question, if I may.
Yeah.
I hope your voice holds out.
Yeah, I know.
You're really struggling there. I'm so interested. You demonstrated how many Italians, came to Spain or even the North and had their influence. I'm kind of interested in the other direction as well. And I wonder if you could comment a little more on the Portinari altarpiece and the fact that it was commissioned for an Italian church and what impact it had when it was displayed there.
Okay, I'm going to bring that up.
Sorry, I hope I'm not throwing you a curveball.
No. Well, it's certainly very, here, am I sharing this part of my screen?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, so here we're looking at the Portinari altarpiece, and so it's an interesting and kind of unusual example of a northern artist, at least of this date, having an impact in Italy. We see this a lot more when we get to Rubens, Goltzius, and then Rubens, who both spent a lot of time in Italy themselves and were transformative of painting styles in Genoa and in Rome. But here, the Portinari altarpiece is an indicator to an Italian audience of the importance of these magnificent details and naturalism in the depiction of faces that was happening in the North. Landscape also was northern landscape became a major influence, and of course Italian examples include Leonardo and the indication or the inclusion of this Spanish lusterware, Islamic Spanish lusterware, is also a beautiful detail that kind of touches on the global appreciation. The patron would have, if not requested, would have approved the inclusion of details like this, and I think it also reflects his and his family's worldliness that details like that are included. So there certainly was it was a two-way street. Italian painting, benefited from the knowledge and understanding of northern trends, and certainly became more so in the 16th and definitely in the 17th century.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I know it was commissioned for an Italian church in Florence, and when it was set up there, apparently it caused quite a stir, and a lot of Italian artists, rushed in to see it, and their eyes were, boggling. So yeah. Sandra had a hand up, and then Bob after her.
Okay.
Yes, I have a quick question about that. Habsburgs in Spain. So we're up to Philip III, I think last mentioned, and is that still part of that lineage?
Yes.
Okay.
So as we'll as we'll see next week, the Philip II is this. He was very long. His reign was very long. Then his son Philip III ruled until 1621, when Philip IV, sorry, took over. Philip IV reigned for about 45 years, and then his son eventually becomes the last of the Habsburg rulers, Charles II, and it's a historically very convenient end to the Habsburg dynasty because it happens in the year 1700. So,
Bob?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could scroll back to the Lucas Cranach portrait of Martin Luther.
yes.
And the reason I'm asking the question, when you put that slide up, it looks like such a modern kind of portrait. The way the nose is outlined in black on the figure's left side, I guess, our right.
Yeah.
Even the way the blue of the cloak is handled. Could you comment some about the technique here?
Sure. Cranach, although there's no signature in this image, there is on the other one of Sibel of Cleves. You can see the little signature at the lower right of the painting. Yeah. Cranach was, he experimented with a high degree of finish in his work, but he also knew Martin Luther, and was actually related to his family. And his paintings of Martin Luther are very humanizing images. They're much less formal than than some of his other royal portraits. And yes, it strikes us as very modern because there's nothing in the background. He was a real innovator of the kind of nondescript single color kind of background in portraits, and he has a way of depicting, certainly here of Martin Luther, where he's looking at the viewer and possibly pausing while he's been speaking to the viewer. It establishes a connection immediately with the viewer that we find modern, but would have been something that was appreciated and requested by Martin Luther. So we find it with Philip Melanchthon, one of his Martin Luther's partners as well. Interesting, quite modern looking portraiture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other hands up? Any questions? Bob, you want to lower your hand? And Lily, how are we doing on time? How long is the exercise going to take?
Exercise is typical, I guess, 45 minutes and 50 minutes. Depends on how long everybody talks. So
Gotcha. So I'm gonna be really rude and take one more question on my part. And if Michael can put up with me, because then we can have a break and then do our exercise. Are you familiar much with Pedro Berruguete's work in Urbino, the Studiolo of Federico da Montefeltro, and the probable influence he had on Piero della Francesca and maybe Raphael?
His period in Urbino is the subject of some debate.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I would have to dig quite a bit deeper than what I've done to prepare for today.
Sure.
Some scholars have said that that he had nothing to do with it, but that kind of raised my eyebrow when I was reading about that in preparation for this. So I think maybe I'll say, why don't I read some more recent scholarship and get back to you on that one.
I would appreciate it. It's a
Yeah,
very
for sure.
fascinating topic for me. I don't want to put you to any extra work, but if you feel challenged and interested, that would be wonderful and very welcomed.
It was one of the things that I came across, and I thought, oh, okay, this needs more work, but I wasn't sure that it was going to be I wasn't sure it was going to come up today, to be honest, and I just
had to throw
read right through it.
Well, I know, and some of those paintings have been attributed to Juan de Flandes instead of Pedro Barraguete, and there's a huge debate. So
yeah, there's a yeah. So okay, well, thank you for bringing that up. I'll get back to you about it.
I appreciate your willingness to pursue it, and I
For
would
sure.
ask all of our trainees and everyone to please give Dr. Brown a great hand. A lot of thanks for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. He spent a lot of time preparing.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you, trainees, and we appreciate all the hard work you put in.
Thank you.
Thank you.